election to the state senate last year is also the result of hard work of many in this room, and for that I am incredibly grateful. And in fact, Molly Brown actually sang the national anthem at my kickoff event over a year ago. So it's good to see her here again. But none of this would have been possible without the 40 years of steadfast service, unwavering principles, and patience that Congressman Ron Paul has exhibited. For many of us in this room, he has served as both a hero and a role model, showing us what can be accomplished if you refuse to back down, refuse to go along to get along. And while those of us in New Hampshire have been busy these last 4 years, so too has Dr. Paul. He has continued to speak of the dangers of overspending, overtaxing government that tries to solve all problems by printing more money. And people are listening. For perhaps the first time in modern American history, phrases such as gold standard, Federal Reserve System, and monetary policy can be overheard in everyday conversations, in restaurants, in grocery stores, on college campuses, and even in the State House. People see the government growing, the debt growing, and the inflation of food and energy, and they are justifiably worried. No one, literally no one in the country could be more credible to stand up at this point and say, "I told you so," than Ron Paul. But of course he doesn't say that. He does what he's always done, calmly, honestly, consistently stand up for sound monetary and economic policy, for rational foreign policy, and for the rights of the individual. And that's why we are here today, to support the man who's been a staunch defender of the Constitution, the man who never voted to increase our debt and who turned down his government pension, the man who inspired the Tea Party movement to call for lower spending, the man who served in the Air Force and who's delivered over 4,000 babies. Please welcome Congressman Ron Paul.
We're on a schedule, you know. That was very nice. And Jim, I certainly want to thank you. I'm very pleased to call Jim Senator, and that is great. And also, Chris, thank you for your efforts. And I want to acknowledge all our special guests behind me. Thank you very much for attending. And thank you all for coming. I am so delighted to see you involved in our revolution. I have one update about the revolution. The revolution is spreading and the momentum is building. Our time has come. It's been around for a long time, but the momentum is here today, not because of what I have done. I happen to have been in an important place and energized some, but it is necessary that the grassroots people understand what the issues are. A generation of people need to know, and I am delighted that the young people are with us in this revolutionary spirit that we have. But a lot of other work has been done. It's been the intellectual work. I am convinced that a nation does not change just for partisan political reasons. What has to happen is there has to be an intellectual revolution to energize people and get people to understand the problems from economic and political terms, as well as foreign policy. That is what has been happening now for quite a few decades. There's quite a bit of difference about attitudes about economics and foreign policy today than it was in 1976 when I was first elected. There's a big difference. And it involves a lot of work from a lot of people. And now that so many people in this country have come to understand that government, so far in its pretense that it can take care of us from cradle to grave and police the world, it is so evident to this growing number of people that government isn't the solution. Government really has created a problem. Now, what our opponents so often we like to do is say, oh, you people don't even want any government. But you know, in our society with our Constitution, there is a role for government. But the Constitution was written explicitly not to restrain your behavior and your life and the way you spend your money. It was written to restrain the federal government. But because of the educational effort and the work that so many have done, but also the strong evidence that there is a failure out there, especially since we saw what happened with the housing bubble, and that was a predictable event that the housing bubble would burst. It did, as the Austrian free market economists had predicted, and because of all this, they have come together, and people are now listening to this revolutionary spirit that is spreading across this country. It's great that I am able to announce in this state, a very special state, because there is so high respect for the spirit of liberty here. So I am very, very pleased that I am once again able to say that I am a candidate for the presidency of like to belittle this effort, but let me tell you, there is an old saying, three's a charm. The conditions have certainly changed, even from 4 years ago. When I think back of the first year that I came up here, it must have been like end of 06, 07. The atmosphere was a lot different. There was an 06 election, an 08 election, and it did not make all of us who believed in liberty all that happy. But boy, I'll tell you what, there has been a significant change. The people have awoken, and they have sent a message, elected a lot of new people to your state legislature, and I'll tell you what, I am convinced that the spirit of liberty is alive and well in New Hampshire. You know, there's a lot of talk about what you should seek in a president. And I'm not one that is prone to talk about, I do this, I will do this, but I can talk generically what I think a president should be able to do and should do. One thing the American people want, and I agree with them, they want a strong president. There is no doubt about that. But the question you should ask, where should those strengths be directed? Should the strength of a president be directed toward building the TSA and Homeland Security? No, the strength and the character of the individual should be directed towards standing up for freedom, standing up for liberty, and restraining government. That's the There's been a lot of challenges challenges already today and yesterday and this last week because of certain positions. I find one very fascinating and something other candidates may well deserve. And that has to do with the drug issue, because it is so symbolic of understanding what liberty is all about. When you think of my position is that you have a right of freedom of choice with your bodies. That, I believe, is a basic principle of liberty. What does that mean? If you have civil liberties and the right to your life and the right to your property, well, it means that you can make very, very important choices. For most of these, most Americans agree with it. They say, yes, the most important thing in my personal life is that I and my family and others, we make our decision about our spiritual life and about our salvation, which cannot be done by government, and we have to provide the maximum amount of freedom for individuals to make those decisions. So the government should always butt out of our spiritual lives. Also, intellectually, we're fairly good at that. The political correctness movement has tried to undermine it, but basically most Americans believe in the First Amendment and say that we have a right to talk about controversial issues. As I have often said, the First Amendment wasn't written for us to be able to talk about the weather. It's written so that we can discuss controversial issues and actually read very controversial and very dangerous literature, especially the literature that promotes big government and welfareism and socialism and all that mess. So we recognize that to be the case. But all of a sudden, people have lost respect for liberty, the understanding of liberty, and we have conceded way too much to the government to decide what we put into our own bodies. If we can control what goes into our spiritual life, what goes into our intellectual life, why should we concede to the government that they decide everything that we do with our own bodies? A strict constitutional position, and the government has very little authority to get involved in our economic or our personal lives. And so that excludes the federal government from being involved if and when we become strict constitutionalists. The federal government shouldn't be involved. But that does not prohibit the states from doing some of the things that they do. Even though we might disagree with it at the national level, under the national law and the Constitution, states have more prerogatives and more choices. But if we looked at education as an example, the Constitution gives no authority for the federal government to run our educational systems, and they shouldn't be doing it. But at the state and federal level, what we should be guaranteeing is the protection of freedom of choice. We should always be aware of the fact that it's very important that individuals who want to opt out, whether it's opting out of Obamacare or opting out of the educational system, we have to protect the right of individuals to homeschool and go to private schools as well. Now, this freedom of choice should lead to other choices about what we put into our bodies. For instance, your right to take things into your body, such as nutritional substances, should never be regulated by the federal government and absolutely never regulated by the United Nations.